There is belief, and then there is skepticism. And between the two lies a vast territory of questions and the unknown. But what if reality is far more complex than we've been willing to perceive? And what if the stories we dismissed as mere myth and legend hold the keys to understanding consciousness? From ghostly encounters to lights in the sky, humanity has always sensed there was something more out there. Some call it the paranormal, and others call it the divine. Some look to the stars for answers, while others search within. Philosophy asks why, theology asks who, science asks how, and we ask ourselves, what if? We stand at a meeting point, a place where the fabric between realities is thinner than you might think. This is Crossroads of the Veil. In the vast silence between worlds, knowledge is not proclaimed, but perceived. And there exists a mode of communication that thrives in that emptiness. It does not challenge you openly, but seeps in through the cracks of your perception. You may mistake it for intuition, but it is an invasive force. It is the dry rattle of leaves on a dying tree. The frantic voices clawing their way through the static between radio frequencies. The thought that surfaces in the quiet of your mind, wearing the mask of your own voice. And to listen is to begin a journey into the darkest corners of your own mind, where the self is unraveled thread by thread. The transformation is not one of enlightenment, but of infestation. It is a slow hollowing out of will and reason, until you are little more than an echo for the whispers. For the most potent corruptions are never shouted. They are carried on a whisper, straight to the soul. This is the dark side of the whispering power. A force defined not by its volume but by the venom in its substance, and the utter erosion it demands of the listener. But you cannot begin to resist a force that you refuse to see or acknowledge. We live our lives surrounded by noise. It's not just a feature of our world. It has become the very defining characteristic of our age. It's a constant layered symphony of distraction, a relentless barrage that most of us have simply learned to accept as normal. We've become so accustomed to the roar that we've forgotten what silence even sounds like. The nonstop 24-hour chatter of the news cycle is the most obvious offender. A relentless engine manufacturing a steady stream of anxiety and outrage. It's a flickering, omnipresent screen in the corner of every airport, every waiting room, every home, feeding us a diet of emergencies and conflicts, training our brains to be in a perpetual state of low-grade panic. It tells us what to fear, who to hate, and why we should be angry, all before the first commercial break. Then there is the physical noise, the snarling frustration of stop-and-go traffic, a daily ritual of shared aggression where we sit in our metal boxes, listening to the cacophony of horns, sirens, and the thumping bass from the car next to us. Each red light, each traffic jam, is a small act of psychological warfare fraying our nerves, shortening our tempers. And when we finally escape the traffic, we dive headfirst into the digital noise, the mindless, hypnotic scrolling through an infinite river of content, a river that feels like it's taking us somewhere important, but carries us everywhere and nowhere all at once. We swipe through faces, opinions, products, and catastrophes, absorbing fragments of information without context, feeling 1,000 shallow emotions without a single deep one. Even in the moments we believe are quiet, our lives are filled with the clamor of our own minds. The endless to-do lists, the mental replay of an awkward conversation, the worries about bill, the needs of family, the simple grinding routine of our daily existence. The silence is filled with the hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of a fluorescent light, the distant wail of a siren. We have painstakingly engineered for ourselves a world that is never truly silent. We have built a fortress of noise to protect ourselves. But what if we've accidentally locked ourselves inside with something far more dangerous than the silence we fear? What if the most significant sounds are the ones we've been trained not to hear? Not a roar, but a whisper. a subtle but persistent suggestion that slides into your thoughts when you're most distracted, a gentle, almost imperceptible nudging of your thoughts from one track to another, the ever so slight shifting of your emotions, where a moment of peace is suddenly soured by a resentment you can't quite trace. It's an unseen presence that seems to slowly guide your hand. It's a whisper so quiet you would swear it was your own internal voice. It knows your secret fears, your private justifications, your hidden vanities. It speaks to you in your own voice, using your own logic, making you believe that the sudden urge to be petty, the comfortable slide into despair, the satisfying rush of self-righteous anger is just a part of who you are. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a targeted, deliberate, and highly intelligent transmission, designed with a single purpose to influence you, to subtly manipulate your choices, to degrade your character, to isolate you from the deepest truths, one seemingly insignificant thought at a time? And what if, many years ago, in the midst of the most destructive war in human history, someone intercepted a series of letters never intended for human eyes, a collection of letters that lays bare the complete strategy and tactics of the Whispering Power, a field manual for a war that no one even knew was being fought? It was published as a work of fiction, a clever satire. That was the only way it could be understood, the only category it could be placed in. We will explore the chilling possibility that its author didn't just make it all up. What if, in the darkest days of the Second World War, a brilliant Oxford professor, a man who had spent his life wrestling with the biggest questions of existence, accidentally tuned into a frequency he was never meant to hear, and had the courage to record everything? This is the story of a hidden war, a reluctant scribe, and a demonic manual that may be more relevant and more necessary today than the very day it was written. Our story begins in the dark. The year is 1941. The location is London, a city submerged in darkness. The mandatory blackouts, a desperate but necessary measure, designed to hide the sprawling city from the nightly visitation of German bombers, have plunged the world's greatest metropolis into an almost total blackness. Streetlights are hooded, windows are covered with thick black fabric, and even a struck match in the open air is a crime. The familiar, comforting glow of civilization has been extinguished, leaving behind a ghost city of deep shadows. Hope is a rationed commodity, and fear is everywhere. Nightfall no longer brings the comforting promise of rest. Instead, it unleashes a fresh wave of terror. The gut-wrenching wail of the air raid sirens echoes through the empty, darkened streets. The siren's cry heralds the drone of approaching Nazi bombers, a sound that vibrates the air. A suffocating anxiety has gripped the city. It's a dread that has seeped into the very foundations of its buildings and into the souls of its inhabitants. Life has become a waking nightmare, a state of sheer terror. An eyewitness from the time described her daily journey to work, making her way through streets littered with bomb craters and shattered glass. She would arrive at her office building, sitting at her desk looking through a gaping hole in the roof at the London sky. The days were manageable, but it was the nights that were a recurring nightmare, a horror from which there is no awakening. In makeshift shelters, dug into back gardens and covered with soil, families would huddle together, and in the cold, cavernous tunnels of the London Underground, strangers pressed together on the platforms, finding a strange, fleeting solace in their shared vulnerability. They were all reduced to the same basic state of frightened humanity. They endured the subterranean chill, the constant terror of the bombs detonating above. Each explosion was a subterranean thunderclap that made the concrete walls sweat and the tracks vibrate, a reminder of their own fragility. The living conditions were often appalling. Some shelters leaked, forcing people to hold umbrellas indoors to shield themselves from the dripping water. Others would flood with water from burst mains, which had to be bailed out by hand. A single lamp might be the only source of light, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the curved walls, and it's their only defense against the bitter cold. Each tremor a muffled explosion that filtered down through layers of dirt and concrete. In these moments between life and death, they would offer silent, desperate, and intensely personal prayers. They are not prayers for victory or for peace, but simply to see the dawn. It is a world gripped by fear and the very real possibility of annihilation. But perhaps all those prayers, all that energy generated by the collective fear and anxiety, were enough to crack open a door. to create a tear in the veil between worlds, because it is in the midst of this chaos, darkness, and terror that a series of very strange articles begins to appear in a newspaper. These aren't the standard news reports from the front lines. They aren't inspirational stories of heroism. They are a series of letters, a private correspondence from a senior entity in an ancient bureaucracy to a junior field operative on his very first assignment. The tone is condescending and ruthlessly practical. The senior entity's name is Screwtape. He is an undersecretary in a department of a shadowy organization. The junior tempter is his nephew Wormwood, an eager but inexperienced demon. And the assignment is you, or rather, a person just like you. An ordinary human being, referred to only as the patient. These letters form a manual of instruction, a masterclass in the art of subversion. And this subversion is of a human soul. The language is bureaucratic, almost corporate. It speaks of quotas and failures, of management techniques, and the proper application of resources. It reads like a series of memos from a particularly demanding and cynical middle manager. But the business of this particular corporation is damnation. The letters are a step-by-step guide on how to nurture small, everyday anxieties into crippling, faith-destroying fears. They explain how to take an innocent pleasure and twist it into a ravenous, life-consuming obsession. They detail the techniques for turning a person's righteous anger at injustice into a bitter and ultimately self-destructive hatred. They lay out a strategy for how to use the nagging annoyances of family life, even the very act of prayer, as weapons against the patient. They are cold, calculating, and pragmatic, because as you read them, a sense of recognition begins to dawn. You begin to see your own life reflected in the pages, your own private thoughts, your own secret habits, your unspoken resentments, and your carefully constructed private rationalizations, all laid bare on the page with terrifying accuracy. The document is not just a story, it's a mirror, and the reflection it shows is of a hidden war being fought in the quiet corners of your own mind. The whispers you thought were your own, the sudden impulses you thought were just your personality, suddenly have a source, a name, and a motive. And here, in this dusty file from 1941, we uncover a chilling consistency. The technology of distraction evolves, of course. It changes from the physical terror of an air raid siren to the silent vibrating buzz of a smartphone notification. But the underlying principle, the core strategy outlined in this demonic manual remains unchanged. Overwhelm the human mind, fix its attention on the endless stream of the trivial, the threatening, the tantalizing, and prevent the silence and introspection required for deeper questions to arise. This is what makes the manual timeless and perhaps far more dangerous now than it ever was before. It suggests that the whispering power is nothing if not adaptable. In the 1940s, it expertly used the palpable fear of bombs and the grinding reality of physical hardship. Today, it uses digital saturation, social media anxiety, and the cognitive offloading of our memories and critical faculties to our devices. The core tactic isn't the specific type of noise, it's the disorienting effect of the noise itself, to fix a person's attention on the stream of the present moment and to prevent any and all introspection. The war is unheard, not because it isn't happening, but because it is fought on the battlefield of your mind. To better understand the story, we must first understand the man who discovered it. The man was Clive Staples Lewis. To millions, you may know him simply as C.S. Lewis, the beloved and imaginative creator of the world of Narnia, a magical land of talking animals, mythical creatures, and epic battles between good and evil entered through a wardrobe. He was a titan of intellect, a distinguished professor of English literature at Oxford. He would go on to earn the prestigious chair of medieval and Renaissance English at Cambridge University. He was a man who demanded hard evidence and logical consistency, most of all from himself. And most importantly, he was a former hardened atheist. He came from a place of profound skepticism. Lewis once described his younger self as being angry with God because he didn't exist. His faith was forged in the crucible of intellectual and existential struggle. His journey to faith was not a sudden conversion. It was a long and deeply intellectual pilgrimage. He didn't want to believe. He was a man who fought his own emerging beliefs every step of the way, resisting with every ounce of his considerable intellect. His conversion was less of a joyful leap and more of a reluctant surrender to what he had concluded was an inescapable truth. He was profoundly influenced by authors like George MacDonald, a 19th century Scottish fantasy writer. The final push came through years of late-night debates with his close circle of friends at Oxford, an informal literary group known as the Inklings. In the fire-lit rooms of his college, over pipes and pints of beer, he would argue for hours with men like J.R.R. Tolkien and Hugo Dyson. These were intellectual heavyweights, scholars of language and myth. He famously described himself in his autobiography as the most dejected and reluctant convert in all England. He first moved from atheism to a general belief in God, or theism. Then, on a fateful motorcycle ride to the Whipsnade Zoo with his brother in September 1931, he reluctantly took the last step from theism to a belief in Christianity. This was not a man given to flights of fancy or unexamined spiritual experiences. This was a man whose entire intellectual life was a testament to rigorous and often painful inquiry, which makes his own account of how the Screwtape letters came to be so deeply and enduringly strange. It doesn't fit the pattern of his other works. According to Lewis, the idea for the book came to him after listening to a speech by Hitler on the radio. But it wasn't the political content of the speech that struck him so forcefully, it was the tone, the underlying diabolical absurdity of it all, the self-important yet ultimately petty and bureaucratic nature of evil. In that moment, the entire concept of hell as a vast, suffocating, and inefficient bureaucracy, obsessed with managerial nonsense, petty professional jealousies, endless paperwork, and a comically inflated sense of its own importance, sprang into his head fully formed. Then, one Sunday morning in church, he said the name Screwtape simply appeared in his mind. There was no creative process. It just arrived, an uninvited guest in his consciousness. It raises the question of where such a fully formed and complex idea truly originates. But it is the profound psychological toll the writing took on him that suggests that something more than mere literary creation was at play. Lewis himself was profoundly disturbed by the process of writing these letters. He described the experience not as creative joy, but as a kind of spiritual suffocation. To portray the devil's perspective, one must adopt a demonic mindset, perceiving good as evil, love as an aberration, God as the enemy, and fellow demons as mere sustenance. In one particularly chilling exchange, Screwtape casually mentions to Wormwood that the ultimate destiny of a junior tempter who fails is not just punishment, but to be literally consumed. The hunger of hell was not metaphorical. Lewis confessed in his letters to friends that the work was profoundly unpleasant and not at all fun to write. He found no pleasure in its cleverness or its popularity. The sustained mental strain of inhabiting this perspective produced a sort of spiritual cramp. When he finally finished the series of letters, he vowed he would never write another. And despite the book's massive success and pleas from his publisher, he never did. The experience had left a scar on him, and he felt tainted by it. This begs the question, was this just a clever literary device from a brilliant mind? Or did C.S. Lewis, perhaps unintentionally, open a door he shouldn't have? Did he become a conduit for something that actually wanted those methods to be known? Or was he tapping into the operational frequency of the whispering power? Lewis believed the reader should look through the author's eyes to see the world that the author sees, not to look at the author himself. The art, not the artist, was the point. The most compelling piece of evidence that the Screwtape letters may be more than just fiction is Lewis's own personal distress, not as a biographical footnote, but as a key piece of data. This irony suggests that the Screwtape letters was a unique and anomalous entity even for its own author. It wasn't just another book he wrote. It was an experience that he endured. It feels less like the testimony of an author and more like the testimony of a man who accidentally touched a high-voltage live wire and spent the rest of his life trying to shake that feeling from his hands. This is where we cross a threshold. We must now leave behind the comfortable notion of the Screwtape letters as a mere work of fiction, and we must begin to treat it as what it purports to be, a potential field guide to an ongoing and deeply personal war. To do this effectively, we must adopt the book's primary rule. We must be willing to invert our entire perspective. We will attempt to see our own world through Screwtape's cold, calculating eyes. In this world, the fundamental realities are flipped. God is not the benevolent creator, he is the enemy. Satan is not the great deceiver. He is our Father below. And humanity is not the cherished children of a loving God. We are the patient, or more chillingly, we are simply the food. The ultimate goal of Screwtape's operation is not our corruption for its own sake, but our consumption. The total and final absorption of a human's identity, their very consciousness, into the collective ego of hell. The first and most critical lesson that emerges from Screwtape's manuscript is this: the whispering power does not announce its presence with thunder and lightning. It does not manifest in grand, theatrical, and unmistakable displays of evil. According to Screwtape, that is a rookie mistake. It is a vulgarity reserved for amateurs. He sharply scolds his nephew for even entertaining the idea of revealing himself directly to his patient, or for attempting some spectacular magical display. Such things, he explains, are not only inefficient, they are counterproductive, as they alert the human to the reality of the spiritual war and might drive him to seek help from the enemy. The true art of temptation, the very core of the whispering powers, lies in its profound subtlety, its camouflage, its complete and utter ordinariness. Screwtape writes, in what is perhaps the most quoted and most terrifyingly insightful line from the entire file: indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one. The gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. This is the first major revelation. The primary weapon of the forces that Screwtape represents is not terror, not hatred, not even sin in the dramatic sense. The primary weapon is distraction. It is simply and devastatingly the art of keeping you busy. In his very first letter of instruction, Screwtape advises Wormwood to abandon any grand schemes and instead to focus his efforts on the stream of immediate sense experiences. The bus that is just about to come down the street, the book you are just about to read, the lunch you are just about to eat. The demonic operative's most effective job is to keep the patient's mind relentlessly occupied with a ceaseless parade of anxieties and immediate concerns. The overarching goal is to never ever let the human ask the big questions, the dangerous questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my ultimate purpose? Where am I truly going? Screwtape explains, with a tone of weary frustration, that the enemy is always trying to draw a human's attention inward, toward these fundamental questions of identity and purpose, and outward toward the vast and silent landscape of eternity. The tempter's job is to keep the human's attention firmly and permanently fixed on the trivial, the temporary, the immediate, the now. He recommends a tactic he calls the pressure of the ordinary. It is a strategy of attrition. If the patient, perhaps looking up at the stars on a clear night, begins to contemplate his tiny place in the vastness of the universe, the tempter's job is to immediately make him start worrying about whether he remembered to lock the door. If the patient feels a sudden, unbidden pang of compassion for his fellow man while reading about a tragedy, the tempter must immediately make him obsess over errors in the newspaper article he's reading. The goal is to short-circuit every impulse toward depth before it can gain any traction. It is a war of attrition, fought not with grand, decisive battles, but with the relentless, soul-deadening power of the mundane. This is a profoundly chilling concept when viewed through a modern lens. Just consider for a moment the vast and sophisticated arsenal at a junior tempter's disposal today. Think of the smartphone in your pocket, a device that is a perfect instrument. It is a portal to infinite distraction, always on, always connected, always demanding your attention. Think of the endless feed designed by some of the most brilliant minds on the planet with the specific goal of capturing and holding your attention for as long as possible. Think of the 24-hour news cycle, an engine engineered not just to inform, but to provoke constant low-level outrage and anxiety. Think of the constant notifications, the emails, the text messages, and the social media alerts that purposefully fragment your attention, shatter your focus, and keep you in a state of perpetual low-grade and highly manageable distraction. Recent research into the effects of this new digital environment is, from our human perspective, deeply alarming. One long-term study conducted by the University of California, Irvine, found that the average attention span of an office worker on a single computer screen has plummeted in recent years. In 2004, it was 2.5 minutes. In recent years, it has dropped to just 47 seconds. We are training ourselves to be incapable of sustained thought. This phenomenon, which some researchers have termed brain drain, shows that the mere presence of a smartphone, even when it is turned off and face down on the table, can occupy attentional resources and measurably degrade our concentration and cognitive performance. We have become addicted to task switching, a behavior that not only makes us less efficient and more stressed, but also prevents the kind of deep, reflective thought that is necessary for spiritual and personal growth. From Screwtape's cold, pragmatic perspective, this isn't just a collection of new technologies. It is the perfect global scale delivery system for his particular brand of spiritual anesthetic. It is the gentle slope made smoother and softer underfoot than he could have ever dreamed of in 1941. It is a global infrastructure built to do his work for him, a system that cultivates a cognitive environment where the very capacity for sustained, critical, and spiritual thought is being systematically and voluntarily eroded. The whispering power is no longer just offering us momentary distractions, it is fostering a population that, by its very cognitive habits, is becoming easier and easier to manipulate. The modern world has, without any demonic intervention required, created the ideal ecosystem for this ancient strategy of the mundane to flourish on an absolutely unprecedented scale. We are beginning to look at our own world from the enemy's perspective, and the first and most shocking thing we see is that their greatest and most effective weapon is the very noise that we have so eagerly and so cleverly built all around ourselves. Now we encounter the first major complication, the point that tightens the knot of this mystery and makes it difficult to grasp. The danger we are beginning to realize is not what we traditionally thought it was. It operates under a camouflage that makes it almost impossible to detect. When we think of paranormal or spiritual threats, our minds, conditioned by movies and folklore, tend to go to dramatic, overt phenomena. Paranormal investigators and spiritual support groups often deal with cases that are at least clearly defined. Poltergeists that throw objects across a room. Apparitions that manifest in darkened hallways visible to the naked eye. Disembodied voices that whisper audible threats from an empty corner of a room. Cases of demonic oppression, or even full possession, while exceedingly rare, are characterized by overt, terrifying, and unmistakable signs. Changes in personality, knowledge of hidden things, aversion to sacred objects. The entity makes its presence known in a way that is impossible to ignore. But the entity described by Lewis operates on a completely different and far more subtle level. His method is not possession, but persuasion. He is not a monster hiding in the closet, waiting to jump out and scare you. He is a whispering campaign director, running for the office of your soul, and his entire strategy is based on plausible deniability. And his primary tactic, the one that makes him so lethally effective, is to make you believe there is no campaign at all. Screwtape dedicates entire letters to this crucial strategy of concealment. He celebrates the modern human tendency to disbelieve in the existence of devils, calling it a major strategic victory. He sees the scientific, materialistic worldview not as a threat, but as his greatest asset. In his preface to the letters, C.S. Lewis himself warns the reader of two equal and opposite errors humans can fall into concerning devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. Screwtape, in his own letters, enthusiastically confirms this from the other side. He explains that demons are equally pleased by both errors and hail a materialist or a magician with the same delight. He instructs his nephew Wormwood to carefully cultivate two opposing, but equally useful, images of demons in the public imagination. The first and most useful in the modern age is the comical figure in bright red tights brandishing a pitchfork. This is the demon as a cartoon character, a figure of folklore, something no modern, intelligent, or educated person could possibly take seriously. This image relegates the entire concept to the realm of medieval superstition, effectively disarming the entire population. The second, and almost as useful image, is to foster an unhealthy, obsessive, and terrified interest in the occult. This creates magicians, spiritualists, and people who live in a constant state of seeing demonic influence behind every shadow. Either way, the tempter wins. If you dismiss them as a joke, you drop your guard completely and become laughably easy to manipulate. If you become obsessed with them, you are focusing all your energy and attention on them instead of on the enemy, which from their perspective is just as effective a distraction. The true danger, the first major complication in any attempt to resist this power, is the sobering realization that the whispering power is most effective when it is completely invisible, when its influence is entirely unattributed. This is a tactic that we now have a modern name for: spiritual gaslighting. The term originates from a 1930s play and a later famous film, in which a manipulative husband systematically tries to convince his wife that she is going insane by subtly altering their environment and then denying that anything has changed. He dims the gaslights in their home, and then when she mentions it, he insists it's all in her head, making her question her own sanity and perception of reality. The whispering power employs the exact same tactic, but on a spiritual and psychological level. It wants you to believe that your worst impulses are entirely your own, that your petty resentments, your irrational anxieties, your creeping despair, your sudden flashes of spite are just natural products of your own flawed psychology. It wants you to own them, to identify with them, to believe that this is simply who you are. Screwtape explains this with a chillingly clear analogy. He says that the enemy wants a man to be able to walk down the street, stand on his own 2 feet, and say, "I am my own." Hell, on the other hand, wants to be able to point at a man and say he is ours. And the easiest and most secure way to gain ownership of a property is to convince the property it was never for sale in the first place, that there is no landlord, and that the quiet, insistent voice suggesting what to do is just the sound of the house settling. This tactic is not unique to C.S. Lewis's Christian framework. It is an archetypal method of spiritual attack found across numerous cultures, religions, and traditions, a testament to its timeless effectiveness. Similarly, other mythologies feature trickster spirits that use subtle persuasion to incite negative actions like violence, despair, or self-destruction. The Screwtape file provides the psychological mechanism for how this gaslighting is made so brutally effective. It details a strategy to convince the patient, especially if he is religious, that he is a house divided. The tempters encourage the human to believe that his sinful old self still coexists as a separate entity alongside his new redeemed self. This provides a plausible internal source for all the negative thoughts and temptations that are being whispered into his mind. The patient, believing that these dark impulses are coming from a rebellious part of his own nature, cannot effectively resist them. He's not just fighting a temptation, he is fighting what he has been led to believe is his own identity. This creates a perfect closed feedback loop for the gaslighting. The whisper of a malicious temptation comes from an external, intelligent source, but the victim is simultaneously supplied with a fraudulent psychological model that explains it away as a purely internal product. The tempter provides both the poison and a flawed diagnosis that blames the patient's own body for producing it. True evil is not a dramatic, violent assault. It's a slow, creeping rot of virtue. It's a gradual poisoning of the will. Consider the cases we see where a person isn't plagued by terrifying visions or voices, but by a persistent, nagging, and soul-crushing sense of hopelessness. A spiritual lethargy that makes getting out of bed feel like a monumental effort. An inexplicable inability to feel joy or love, even for the people they care about most. A constant droning voice in the back of their head that constantly tells them they are worthless, that their efforts are pointless, that nothing really matters in the end. This is Screwtape's anesthetic at work. He provides a perfect example when advising Wormwood on how to corrupt the act of prayer. Don't try to stop the patient from praying, he warns. That would be too obvious and would alert him that something is wrong. Instead, the moment the patient kneels, make him focus his attention on his own feelings. Make him self-conscious. Make him try to manufacture a feeling of devotion or sincerity. The prayer then ceases to be a genuine communication with the enemy, and instead becomes an anxious exercise in self-analysis. The man thinks he is being deeply spiritual, when in fact he is just talking to himself in circles, examining his own emotional state and getting nowhere. The great complication is this: how do you possibly fight an enemy who has convinced you he isn't there? How do you resist a whisper that you have been trained to believe is your own voice? The demonic manuscript laid out in the Screwtape file is a strategy of infiltration and subversion so deep, so subtle that it targets the very core of your personal identity and your self-awareness. The war, it turns out, is not for your body or your allegiance in a simplistic sense. It is a war for your consciousness itself. And the first, most difficult, and absolutely essential line of defense is simply to admit the possibility that the war is real. Screwtape's next lesson is his most insidious, his most personal, and it is the one that strikes closest to the heart of modern life. It is the weaponization of the self. Specifically, it is the weaponization of pride. According to the Screwtape doctrine, pride is not just one sin among many. It is the great ultimate sin. It is the state of mind from which all other sins and miseries naturally flow. It is the ultimate spiritual anesthetic, because it is the one state of mind which is completely and utterly impenetrable to the enemy's influence. A truly proud man cannot be touched by grace, by love, or even by simple reason, because he is living in a completely self-contained, self-referential world. He has, in effect, become his own God, his own source of truth, and his own object of worship. He orbits himself completely. But once again, the genius of the strategy lies in its subtlety. This is not the loud, boisterous, theatrical pride of a tyrant or a cartoonish narcissist. It's a much quieter, more subtle, and far more dangerous vintage that can fester in the heart of even the most seemingly humble person. Screwtape schools his nephew Wormwood in the dark and delicate art of cultivating what he calls spiritual pride. The tactic is a masterpiece of psychological jujitsu, using the opponent's own virtue against him. Let's say the patient has successfully resisted a particular temptation. He has performed a genuine good deed. He has felt a moment of authentic, unself-conscious humility. Wormwood's job as his tempter is to immediately, at that very instant, introduce a new and subtle thought into his mind. I'm being humble. The very moment that thought enters his consciousness, the humility is gone. It evaporates like mist in the sun. It is instantly replaced by pride at his own humility. The man is now proud of being humble. He is secretly congratulating himself on his own remarkable spiritual progress. And in that precise instant, the connection to the true source of that progress is severed. He has taken a gift freely given by the enemy and has turned it into a trophy for his own ego. This is a classic psychological defense mechanism known as rationalization, a way of reframing one's own actions to feel better about oneself. But here it is twisted into a spiritual weapon. This is the moment for us. We must pause and ask ourselves with brutal honesty, how many times have you done something good, something generous or kind, only to feel a warm, self-satisfied glow afterward? How many times have you caught yourself mentally replaying your own generosity, your own patience, your own cleverness, your own spiritual insight? How many times have you compared your own good deed to the perceived failings of others? According to this demonic manual, that warm, self-satisfied glow is the hook. It is the subtle but critical shift from gratitude for the ability to do good to self-congratulation for having done it. And that shift is the primary entry point for the whispering power to get a foothold in the soul. But the analysis in the letters goes even deeper, revealing a profound metaphysical claim about the very nature of evil itself. As Screwtape explains his various strategies to Wormwood, he also inadvertently, and much to his own disgust, reveals the core truth of his own existence. Evil, he shows us through his actions and complaints, is not a creative force. It is not an alternative power to good. It is, by its very nature, a parasite. It can only spoil, twist, and corrupt what the enemy has already created. It cannot make anything new. This is a concept known in classical theology as the privation of good, a doctrine most famously articulated by the ancient philosopher Augustine of Hippo. In this view, evil has no actual substance of its own. It is merely a corruption, a deficiency, or a hole in something that was originally created good. A wound is not a thing in itself, it is the absence of healthy flesh. Blindness is not a thing, it is the absence of sight. Evil is the same. Screwtape admits this directly in a moment of frustration with his nephew's incompetence. He made the pleasures, he writes to Wormwood, referring to the enemy, all our research so far has not enabled us to produce a single one. All we can do is to encourage humans to take the pleasures which our enemy has produced, at times, or in ways which he has forbidden. The strategy is not to create new temptations, but to corrupt existing goods. He instructs Wormwood to take the natural, healthy, and God-given human desire for pleasure, for instance, the simple enjoyment of a good meal, and to push it, exaggerate it, make the pleasure the entire point of the meal, rather than a pleasant byproduct of nourishing the body. Slowly turn it from a simple, healthy enjoyment into a demanding, obsessive, and picky need, for a particular kind of food, prepared in a particular kind of way, at a particular kind of time. This creates gluttony, not the obvious gluttony of gross excess, but the more subtle and socially acceptable gluttony of delicacy, of being a foodie whose day is ruined if the toast is not the right shade of brown. The original God-given pleasure is thereby corrupted into a tool of control and a source of constant low-level anxiety. Take the deep and good human need for belonging, twist it into a desperate, anxious need for inclusion in a specific or social circle, which then inevitably leads to snobbery, exclusion, and contempt for those outside the circle. Take the natural and righteous desire for justice, inflame it with pride and hatred, turning it into a self-righteous, vengeful rage that seeks not to correct an injustice, but to destroy and humiliate the perceived enemy. Evil has no substance of its own. It is merely spoiled good. It's a fungus that can only grow on a living tree. It has no life of its own. This parasitic nature leads to what Screwtape bitterly calls the horror of the same old thing. The enemy, he complains with a deep sense of frustration, has filled the world with an endless variety of genuine and satisfying pleasures. He has created seasons, so that we appreciate the warmth of summer after the cold of winter. He has created rhythms of work and rest, of hunger and satisfaction, of companionship and solitude. Hell, being unable to create anything new, has nothing truly new to offer. It can only offer an endless and ultimately unsatisfying pursuit of novelty that never, ever delivers on its promise. It creates fashion, fads, trends, and the desperate, anxious need to be up to date. But the result is always the same: a fleeting thrill followed by boredom and disappointment. It fosters an ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure. The whispering power promises excitement, freedom, and endless novelty, but it can only deliver a sterile, repetitive cycle of intense desire, followed by bitter disillusionment. It's the psychological engine behind the man who chases endless affairs, only to find the same crushing emptiness in each new partner. It's the driving force behind the consumer who truly believes that the next purchase, the next gadget, the next car, will finally make them happy. It's the logic of the addict, forever chasing a high that will never be as good or as pure as the first time. The sobering realization of this moment, as we stare into the mirror of our own lives, is this: the whispers promise you the world, but they are patiently leading you into a smaller and smaller cage of your own making, a cage built of your own pride, your own obsessions, and the relentless, exhausting pursuit of an echo. We are looking into the mirror of our own lives and of our entire consumer culture, with its endless cycle of manufactured trends and engineered desires. And we must ask ourselves the uncomfortable question: are we in that cage now? And if so, how do we find the key? While Screwtape's tactics of distraction and spiritual gaslighting appear terrifyingly effective, his strategy is built on a fatal blind spot. He is utterly baffled by selfless love. From his predatory worldview, the concept of a being who empowers rather than consumes is a logical absurdity. He can only interpret God's love as a form of propaganda, a deceptive means to an end he has yet to uncover. This fundamental misunderstanding shapes his entire perspective. He sees God's desire for humanity not as a father wanting sons, but as a rival seeking to absorb souls, just as hell does. Consequently, he views the defining moments of Christian theology with contemptuous confusion. The incarnation, a creator becoming a creature, is to him an unforgivable act of foolishness. Grace, an unearned divine intervention, is simply cheating. Because Screwtape cannot comprehend love, he cannot effectively fight against it. He is a brilliant tactician who is completely ignorant of the foundational reality of the conflict. He can analyze the mechanics of temptation, but is deaf to the spiritual truth, like a master chess player who doesn't understand the concept of checkmate. This reveals the great reversal. The whispering power is formidable, but it is also fundamentally blind, and that blindness gives humanity a hidden and incredible advantage. Every war, whether it is fought with armies or with whispers, has its turning points. It has its critical battles, its moments of unforeseen disaster that can shift the entire strategic landscape in a single shattering instant. In the covert war for the immortal soul of the patient, the climax arrives not with a subtle, insidious whisper, but with the deafening, world-shattering roar of high explosives. It comes in the form of a German air raid. This is the disaster, the crisis, the moment when everything goes horribly and irrevocably wrong for the tempters. Throughout the entire series of letters, the young demon Wormwood has been diligently tempting his patient by exploiting the constant grinding anxieties of living in wartime Britain. His uncle Screwtape has given him meticulous, detailed advice on exactly how to use the fear of the bombs, how to foster a deep and satisfying hatred for the Germans, by carefully framing it not as base hatred, but as righteous anger on behalf of innocent women and children, how to use the daily weariness, the uncertainty, and the physical discomfort of war to grind down the patient's spirit, to make him feel abandoned by God, to make him believe that the physical horror all around him is the only true and ultimate reality. They have had some small successes. They have caused him to stumble into petty arguments with his mother. They have filled his head with doubt, resentment, and spiritual pride. They feel that they are making slow but steady progress. The food, as Screwtape chillingly refers to the patient, is being slowly seasoned and prepared for the table. Then one night, the bombs begin to fall directly on the patient's town. We can imagine the scene drawing from the thousands of harrowing eyewitness accounts of those who lived through the Blitz. The piercing, mournful scream of the sirens, a sound that never failed to curdle the blood. The frantic rush of people into the flimsy security of their shelters. The percussive, rhythmic thud of the anti-aircraft guns firing into the blackness, their shells bursting like angry temporary stars in the night sky. The weird whistling sound of a bomb's descent, a sound that eyewitnesses described as the most terrifying of all, followed by a vivid, silent flash of brilliant flame on the horizon, a column of earth and debris flying into the air, and a moment later, the ground heaving as the shockwave arrived. The patient, who is doing his duty as a volunteer air raid warden, is out in the thick of it, his helmet on, his gas mask at his side, helping people, dousing small fires, and being a good neighbor. In the midst of that chaos and terror, something goes horribly, terribly wrong for hell. The patient dies. A bomb lands too close. He is killed almost instantly. Screwtape receives the news and sends a final letter to his nephew Wormwood. It is not a letter in the same sense as the others. It is a scream of pure, undiluted, and utterly impotent rage. From Screwtape's meticulously planned, long-term perspective, this is the ultimate catastrophe. It is a total and complete failure. Now you will not get him, he writes, his bureaucratic tone finally shattering completely. All the careful work of weeks, all the subtle preparation, all the psychological manipulation is lost in a single random microsecond of explosive chemistry. In the final moments of his life, as the air splits apart around him, the patient sees. For the very first time in his life, he sees with spiritual eyes. He sees his tempter, the pathetic and terrified Wormwood, and in that instant, he recognizes the part he has played, the source of so many of his doubts and petty moods. He sees the reality of the spiritual world he has been living in all along, a world that was hidden just beneath the surface of his mundane life. And then he sees them, the angels, the radiant, overwhelming presence of the enemy. And in that instant of pure seeing, he understands everything. Screwtape describes it with a visceral physical disgust. The patient is now safe. He has been lost to them forever. He has been stolen. The worm has been snatched from their hungry mouths at the very last second. This is the great crisis for the demons and their whispering power. It reveals their single greatest vulnerability. Time. They are creatures who must operate within the linear flow of time. They need time to work their insidious, gradual magic. They absolutely depend on the gentle slope, the slow, patient erosion of virtue, the long, monotonous years of middle-aged prosperity or middle-aged adversity to fully unravel the soul from its connection to heaven. The enemy, however, operates both in and out of time. He deals in the currency of eternity. A human life, from Screwtape's cold resource management point of view, is nothing more than a brief window of opportunity, a chance to secure a resource before it is permanently removed from the board. If that window closes prematurely, and the patient's loyalties are not yet fully and irrevocably secured for hell, the entire project is a write-off. And in the specific case of this particular patient, it's far worse than a simple write-off. It's a decisive and humiliating victory for the other side. Because in his final moments on earth, the patient was afraid, yes, but he was also courageous. He died at his post, doing his duty to his neighbors. His fear, which his tempter Wormwood had been so carefully nurturing for weeks, was in the end not the defining emotion of his life or his death. His death was a moment of terror, yes, but it was also a moment of ultimate clarifying truth, and in that final clarity he chose correctly. This climactic event forces us to confront the ultimate stakes of this hidden war. Paranormal investigators often document tragic cases of so-called earthbound spirits, souls that seem to be trapped by a sudden trauma, by unfinished business, or by a profound confusion about their state. Perhaps these are the projects that were interrupted, but not fully lost, the ones left in a kind of spiritual gray area. But for Screwtape, there is no gray area. There is only success or failure, consumption or loss. The death of the patient is a total, unmitigated, and career-damaging disaster for his entire operation. And the final letter to Wormwood is not one of mentorship or even angry reprimand. It is a letter of pure, undisguised, predatory hunger. The bureaucratic mask slips away entirely, revealing the true and horrifying face of evil. It is not just a system of temptation, it is a system of cosmic cannibalism. Screwtape ends his correspondence by telling his terrified nephew that all his affection has now turned to a ravenous desire to consume him. "My love for you," he writes with dripping, hateful sarcasm, "I think they will give you to me now, or a bit of you. Love you. Why, yes, as a dainty morsel I will grow fat on." In this final, terrifying moment, we see that hell is not a kingdom of allied rebels, but a self-devouring, endlessly hungry void that sees everything, including its own agents, as nothing more than potential fuel. The crisis is the revelation that for all its cunning, for all its psychological insight, this power can be utterly defeated by something as simple and as sudden as a falling bomb, and that its internal nature is one of pure, unrestrained, self-consuming rage. We have followed the trail from the blacked-out, bomb-scarred streets of wartime London to the deepest, most cynical recesses of a demonic mind. We have analyzed their core strategies of distraction and spiritual gaslighting. We have seen their fundamentally parasitic nature and their profound, crippling blindness to the reality of love. We have witnessed their ultimate failure in the case of the patient. Now, we must formulate a practical defense against the influence of the demonic whispering power. What is the moment of truth for us, the potential patients in this ongoing silent war? The answer, which is scattered throughout the text and confirmed by centuries of wisdom from theologians, spiritual advisors, and even the paranormal field, is both deceptively simple and profoundly difficult to put into practice. The ultimate weapon against their whisper is awareness. It is the active, conscious, deliberate act of listening to your own thoughts and calmly and rationally asking, "Is this really me? Where did this thought come from? Does it lead to life or does it lead to despair?" It is the reclamation of your own mental and spiritual sovereignty. Let's break down this doctrine into an actionable method for our own defense, using 3 core principles derived directly from the weaknesses revealed in the Screwtape file. First, recognize the tactic of distraction and deploy the countermeasure of silence. Screwtape's primary and most effective tool is noise. Not just audible noise, but mental and emotional noise. The pressure of the ordinary. The relentless 24/7 stream of trivialities, anxieties, and stimulations designed to cloud your mind and prevent any deep, meaningful, or dangerous thought. The countermeasure, therefore, is its polar opposite: silence. This is not a passive state of doing nothing. It is a strategic and powerful act. It is the act of deliberately carving out moments of quiet in your loud day, turning off the phone, not just putting it on silent, closing the laptop, going for a walk without earbuds, sitting alone with your own thoughts for just 5 minutes without any external stimulation. It is in these moments of intentional silence that the whispers can be most easily identified, because they are no longer masked by the overwhelming external clamor. When the world goes quiet, you can begin to hear the other voices more clearly. Priests and monks call this practice contemplation. Philosophers might call it self-reflection. A paranormal investigator might call it establishing a baseline for your own consciousness, so you can recognize an intrusive signal. Whatever term you prefer, the practice is the same. You must quiet the outside world to better hear what is truly happening in the inside one. Understand the nature of the bait and practice the virtue of temperance. The whispering power rarely tempts you with things that are intrinsically and obviously evil. That would be too crude, too easy to spot. It tempts you with good things, pleasure, love, justice, knowledge, security, that are twisted, exaggerated, and taken out of their proper proportion until they become monstrous. The defense, therefore, is not to reject these good things. That would be to fall into a different kind of trap, the puritanical one that Screwtape also loves to exploit, turning people into miserable, joyless beings. The defense is to embrace these good things in their proper measure. This is the ancient philosophical concept of virtue, specifically the cardinal virtue of temperance. It is the learned ability to enjoy pleasure without becoming a slave to it. It is the capacity to pursue justice without becoming consumed and destroyed by hatred. It is the strength to love another person deeply and passionately without making them your entire reason for living, a mistake that crushes them under the weight of your need. It is a constant, delicate balancing act, a moment-by-moment choice to keep good things from becoming your God. It is enjoying the wine without becoming the drunkard. Third, deploy the ultimate weapon of humility. According to the Screwtape file, pride is the impenetrable fortress of hell. It is the ultimate spiritual anesthetic that numbs the soul to the touch of grace, love, and reason. Therefore, its direct opposite, humility, is the skeleton key of heaven. It is the one thing against which hell has no effective defense. But what is humility in this practical context? It is not, as is often misunderstood, thinking less of yourself. It is not groveling or self-hatred. True humility is thinking of yourself less. It is the simple, objective, and liberating recognition that you are not, in fact, the center of the universe. It is the ability to laugh at yourself when you do something foolish. It is the willingness to genuinely apologize and admit you were wrong. It is the act of serving someone else or doing a good deed without any thought of reward, recognition, or even self-satisfaction. Screwtape admits with great frustration that when a human has a moment of genuine, unself-conscious humility, hell is completely baffled. They simply don't know what to do. Their hooks can find no purchase in a mind that is not focused on itself. These three principles, silence, temperance, and humility, form the core of our personal defense. But there is a fourth, overarching strategy that empowers all of them. Acknowledge and actively align with the other signal. The Screwtape doctrine reveals a being who is pathologically and permanently blind to the power of love and grace. The ultimate countermeasure, then, is to consciously align oneself with that force. The letters are a Christian text, so for Lewis, this means unambiguously prayer, worship, and reliance on God. But even if we view this from a secular or parapsychological perspective, the core principle holds true. Investigators of psychic phenomena often speak of the critical importance of intent, of focusing on positive, protective, or high vibration energies to ward off negative or parasitic influences. The demonic power of the whispers thrives on fear, anxiety, resentment, pride, and ego. Therefore, it is fundamentally repelled by courage, peace, forgiveness, and selflessness. The moment of truth for us is this. This spiritual battle is not won with a single dramatic exorcism. It is not won by shouting defiantly into the darkness. It is won or lost in the quiet, seemingly insignificant choices you make 100 times a day. The choice to be patient when every fiber of your being wants to be angry. The choice to truly listen to someone else when you are bursting to talk about yourself. The choice to forgive when every instinct tells you to hold on to a grudge. The choice to be silent when the world is screaming for your attention. The choice to look up at the stars and feel a sense of genuine wonder, instead of looking down at your phone and feeling a familiar sense of anxiety. Each one of these small conscious choices is a jamming signal. It is a countermeasure that corrupts the enemy's data stream. The whispering power is real, the evidence suggests. But its power is not absolute, it is conditional. And that one single condition is your consent. We have followed the trail of evidence, analyzed the letters, dissected the tactics, identified the vulnerabilities of the opposing force, and formulated a coherent doctrine of defense. But in many ways, the story is not over. We are left, finally, with the enduring mystery of the man who brought this information to light. Clive Staples Lewis, the brilliant Oxford scholar, the former convinced atheist who became the 20th century's most influential and accessible popular defender of the Christian faith. He wrote this chillingly accurate manual of demonic warfare. a document so psychologically astute, so timeless in its application, that it continues to resonate with millions of readers 80 years later. He described the psychological toll of writing it as immense. He felt contaminated by the process, as if he had been forced to wade through spiritual sewage day after day to retrieve this information. The experience, he said, brought him no joy, only a profound sense of relief when it was finally over. This leaves us with a final, thought-provoking set of questions. Was the strain he felt merely the result of a powerful, empathetic imagination? Was it simply the occupational hazard of a great fiction author immersing himself too deeply into the dark perspective of his own creation? Or was it something else entirely? Did C.S. Lewis, by transcribing these otherworldly letters, become a target himself? Did he, as he modestly claimed, simply have a clever idea during a church sermon one Sunday morning? Or was there more to it? Did he, through his unique combination of intellectual rigor, imaginative depth, and a newfound spiritual sensitivity, accidentally tune into a frequency that he then found it difficult to let go? Did he touch the veil? And if so, did something from the other side reach back and leave a permanent handprint on his very soul? We cannot know for sure, but for those of us who stand at the crossroads of belief and disbelief, listening for signals in the noise, Lewis gave us a possible, terrifying glimpse into an enemy's mindset. And by his own account, he paid a high personal price for it. The closing of our investigation tonight is not a true conclusion, it is a warning, and it is a challenge. The whispers did not end in 1941 with that last hateful letter from Screwtape to Wormwood. They have only evolved. They have grown more subtle, more sophisticated, more deeply and seamlessly embedded in the very fabric and the very noise of our modern world. The gentle slope to hell is now paved with fiber optic cables. The pressure of the ordinary is now delivered to us through a high-definition screen that lives in the palm of your hand. This entire conflict, as revealed in the Screwtape file, is a battle for the single most valuable territory in the known universe: your attention. Where you place your attention determines what you value, and what you value ultimately determines who you are. The pattern of this conflict throughout the years shows a power that constantly updates its delivery system to match the technology of the age, from the overt terror of falling bombs to the subtle, pervasive anxiety of missing out. The critical error, the fundamental mistake we continue to make, is our enthusiastic consent to our own distraction. We eagerly construct the global architecture of noise, and then are genuinely surprised when we can no longer hear the signal for all the static. The ultimate purpose of this entire narrative, the reason for opening this strange old file tonight, is to equip you with the ability to perform a kind of mental and spiritual analysis on your own thoughts. This entire investigation has been designed to open your own mind for a moment of critical self-awareness. So listen. When this is over, find a moment of silence and listen closely to the quiet suggestions in the back of your own mind. The little rationalizations that effortlessly excuse a selfish act. The sudden sour resentments that can kill a moment of pure joy. The gentle, persistent nudges away from silence and toward distraction, away from humility, and toward self-congratulation, away from love and toward fear and anger. When you hear them, when you learn to recognize their tone, you have to ask yourself a very simple but very serious question. Who or what is doing the talking? As we step back from the crossroads, remember the veil between the known and the unknown is thinner than you think. But the story doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. Because what we explore here is not just about the phenomena, but the journey that we are all on, searching for our meaning and purpose in life, seeking the knowledge and wisdom to solve the deeper mysteries in our universe, and to find and fulfill our destinies. Unexplained sightings, spirits, and science. They are all connected, and they have been interwoven into the grand tapestry of life. So remember, keep pulling at the threads, because this has been Crossroads of the Veil.